Canadians' debt outlook just went from bad to worse, and we have got new data from across these different surveys that show how stretched the consumer really is, especially when it comes to their mortgage. And we've also got a story that sounds like it's something straight out of a depression. So let's get right into this and discuss what is going on. MMP Consumer Debt Index, Canadians' debt outlook reaches lowest point in 5 years. So let's see some of the key points that they raise in this article. An increasing number report a decline in their capacity to handle an interest rate increase, 28%, up 5 points, or an additional $130 in interest payments. Half of the report says that they are $200 away or less from not being able to meet their financial obligations. And obviously, we are seeing that in terms of auto loan delinquencies that are rising and also credit card delinquencies that are rising. And when you've got financial stress, obviously people are going to default on those first, and the mortgage is going to be the last thing that they default on, especially considering it's such an emotional piece in Canadians' life. That is going to be the last thing that they default on for sure. And you've also got the negative amortization aspect that we went over yesterday with the banking system. But you know, these surveys, they just keep coming in and they look worse every time. So let's see what they're saying here. More than half, 51% of Canadians report they are $200 away or less from not being able to meet their financial obligations, including 3 in 10, 31%, who say they already don't make enough to cover their bills and debt payments. So essentially, you're getting told right now in advance that these people are defaulting. They're essentially, it's game over for them. And it's sad to stand here and say that to you, but that is the reality of what we are seeing. The problem is when you have an economy where the debt to income ratio is the second highest in the world, what do you really expect to happen? When debt to income ratios get this ridiculously high, what do you expect to happen? I mean, it is just ludicrous that people think that we can just carry on, that interest rates will come back down right to the floor. They'll go even lower, maybe even negative, and everything's just going to be okay. I mean, that is just not going to happen. So the reality is we are dealing with this getting worse and worse as these interest rates get held higher for longer. It's just going to be more and more people slip into this state. So 31% who say they already don't make enough to cover their bills and debt payments, that's a bad sign. The average amount of money that Canadians say they have left over at the end of the month has dropped significantly this quarter to $674, down $97 from the previous quarter as the surging cost of living is chipped away at household budgets. And you know, you constantly see that the Bank of Canada and institutions like that constantly talk about wage growth. Oh, we need to bring wage growth down. The fact is, wage growth has been so negative, and I've brought you charts that have shown that in prior videos, and I'll link one at the end of this. But the fact is, people's wages have just been insanely negative. I mean, honestly, it's going to be a disaster where they close at the end of this year. Once again, they're going to close negative on the year. Another year of negative wages is after 2022, where we saw negative wages of over 7% essentially when you adjust for a more realistic inflation number. And you know, that is partly the problem. The institutions have fed data from the government that is highly manipulated so the government can spend more money, grow bigger, grow its power and influence. But essentially, obviously, these things are not good long term. It doesn't create a good long-term picture. It creates massive financial distortions, which we've seen in the economy over the past decade. You know, these things just not good. Anyway, let's switch over to this survey. So more Canadians struggling with monthly mortgage payments, Angus Reid survey. A new study says the number of Canadians struggling with their monthly mortgage payment is on the rise, along with worries of potential higher payments when it comes to renew with their bank. Data released Monday by the Angus Reid Institute shows 15% of mortgage holders say they find the financial aspect of their mortgage very difficult, up from 8% in March and 11% in June. So that is rising. It's just going to continue to rise. I mean, where do you think that trend is going? It's not going down. Obviously, the risk there is that these people end up in default. What does that do to the banking system? And as we've discussed before, you don't need a massive amount of defaults when you've got a system this leveraged to bring down the banking system. You only really need 5 to 8%, in my opinion. It got as high as 12 to 13 in 2008 in the US. The Canadian system is much more leveraged than the US system was back then. then. And I think there's more subprime risk in Canada than there was back in 2008 in the US. Essentially, the amount of fraud that has been allowed to continue has just been for so long there in Canada, whereas, it was really just a thing for a couple of years in the US. It's been a thing for 5, 6, 7 years here in Canada. So how much fraud is in this system is just an unknown, but obviously it's very concerning. The survey says that despite the expectations, the Bank of Canada will hold its key interest rate steady at 5% when it announces its next decision Wednesday. Obviously, this has already happened last week and they held it, continued QT. The current level has 79% of respondents worried or very worried they will face higher payments when it comes time to renew their mortgage. And just think about the worries of the people who are in negative amortization. A lot of them are just not being educated on what's really going on behind the scenes there. What are the consequences of their mortgage being in negative amortization going to be? I'm sure a lot of people misunderstand it and think that they're just going to be allowed to have a 60-year mortgage or a 50-year mortgage. They don't have a clue what is really going on. And that could be devastating for a lot of people as this cycle moves further and further into the latter stages. So very interesting what's going on there. And then obviously this has happened as well. We've got yet again another survey. Financial worry increasing for Calgary homeowners ahead of key interest rate decision. Now, obviously the interest rate decision has come, but the reason why I'm highlighting Calgary homeowners is obviously because the Calgary housing market has been actually quite resilient. So that begs the question, what's going to happen when reality eventually hits in Calgary? Because really it's just the fact that Calgary has kind of been center for the hysteria and mania in Canadian real estate. It's not that the fundamentals are any better in Calgary at all. It's just because people have hysteria around Calgary. They think it's the best place on earth and the grass is greener. And obviously the trends have not changed that much over the past couple of years. The economy has not changed that much either. It's just got a lot worse. So what's this going to mean? It's going to be incredibly interesting to see. Angus Reid's economic stress index suggests 39% of Albertans polled are struggling financially. That's second only to Manitoba at 42%. So Alberta, second in the country in terms of people struggling financially. Does that kind of spell a good thing for the real estate market here in Alberta down the road? I don't think so. The economy has not been fixed. Nothing has been fixed. That's what people fail to understand. The economy is a lot worse than it was in 2019. It's just a lot of these stimulus and distortions that have come out into the play. There's still stimulus going on right now, believe it or not. A lot of that stimulus money has wildly distorted the economy here, made people think the economy is booming. People have looked at oil prices and think, wow, the economy must be booming in Alberta because it's back to 2014, 2015, when that's just not the dynamic anymore at all. The energy industry has been contracting as we've covered on this channel. So very interesting what's happening here. In the last 6 months, the number of people who say it's very difficult to pay their mortgage has doubled from 8 to 15%. We just covered that. It's about 45% overall of people who describe having difficulties paying their mortgage month to month. So we're seeing kind of a growing number of that, said John Rowe, a research associate at the Angus Reid Institute. So that's not a good thing. And then Calgary realtor Curtis agrees the confidence of Calgarians and their ability to afford a mortgage has decreased. He says qualifying for a 7 to 8% stress test is very difficult for home buyers. And I mean, the stress test, how effective has that even been anyway? The fact that people were having to qualify at 4 to 5%. I mean, really, that made no difference. All these people had to do this stress test back in 2021 and 2022, and now they're looking at payments where that stress test was and they can't afford it. Now, obviously, we've had a massive amount of inflation. They've seen their wages eroded as well. But I think it just goes to show what a useless thing the stress test really is. But yeah, anyways, let's continue on here. What we're finding right now is that as rates increase, a lot of people are becoming concerned about being able to make their monthly payments. And it also works in an adverse way because those people that may not be able to afford their mortgage anymore opt to rent. So, I really don't think this boom is going to last in Calgary real estate. I think it's just another bull trap. This one's just going to a higher high. And you can often see that. I mean, I literally made a video back in 2022 describing this, saying that you can have these bull traps that often go higher than the previous high. And it all depends on the market dynamics at that time. Obviously, you've got a massive amount of investors that are flooding into the market. A lot of them are thinking the rents that we see right now are normal and are just going to continually rise. I think we'll see a pullback in rents, especially, that will definitely get investors worried. But the thing is, I don't think we're going to see a return to, 2019 rents or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying here. And then I just want to finish off with this story, because this kind of just is something that you would only hear in a depression, essentially. It's not a good thing at all. So this guy called Ben on Twitter, I'm not going to butcher his last name there, has posted this, which he found on Facebook. So I am on the verge of hitting rock bottom. I came to Canada 5 months ago as an international student, and I've been looking for a job ever since, whilst doing Uber Eats to cover my expenses. It was okay so far, but now it will be impossible to continue doing Uber Eats by my bike from next week. Also, it's time to pay my next semester fees, and I hardly have any money left to survive the next few months, let alone pay the fees. I am worried and can't even ask for money from my parents to pay the fees. Can anyone please help me get a part-time job in Mississauga? I just need a source of income, no matter how less I make. So it's kind of crazy. These are the sort of things that you would see in a depression. And as I've said many times on this channel, the people who are coming over to this country right now are just going straight into that depression. So if you're outside of Canada and you want to come to a country that's in a depression, by all means, move to Canada. It's honestly just a disastrous decision for a lot of these people. Obviously, we're seeing students that are lining up at food banks. We're seeing students go into homeless shelters. We're seeing many Canadians going into homeless shelters. I mean, I saw a story the other week about somebody who moved to Calgary from Toronto because they secured a job, and she's now living in a homeless shelter for the first time in her life. What sort of economy and country does that kind of paint for you? Fact is, we are heading into a depression right now, and I don't think there's any way that we can steer ourselves out of this, unfortunately. It pains me to say this because I love Canada. Canada is my home. I'm a Canadian citizen. So it's just disastrous, and it's absolutely terrible. That's the only way of saying it. But unfortunately, people have to take the red pill here. They have to realize what is really going on. There's no rosy outlook here that I would love to come on here and paint a optimistic picture of what's going on. That would be very disingenuous of me to do so. And that's why I refuse to do it. When there is optimism on the horizon, I will be here for that. So anyway, I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this video here, you might like that video I was talking about earlier from 2022. You might like this playlist here. If you're looking for a VPN to get around Bill C11, then go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. This was brought to you on a VPN. Take care of yourselves, guys. Bye-bye.